Yeah, the game's alright.
Ah, bastards!
Fucking 10 out of 10! Masterpiece!
Oh man, I never thought I would see the day when I would be reviewing a brand new Crash Bandicoot game. After all the highs and lows of the series, from the cream of the crop to the shit to the really shit, Crash's big remake-driven comeback has finally led to what most have been waiting for, a brand new entry in the series. And hell, not just any new Crash game, but one that is a direct sequel to the original trilogy with a title so damn tongue-in-cheek. Oh yes, I had not been this excited for a game in a long time. But it remained to be seen, with Toys for Bob at the helm being new to the series. Could they recapture that magic of the Naughty Dog titles? Well, with just under 100 damn hours sunk in already, Jesus Christ, and still creeping up on 106%, what do I think? Well, I think I could say by this point that yes, Crash 4 is the best Crash Bandicoot game. Is it perfect? No, but my god, Crash 4 not only acts as a faithful continuation of Naughty Dog's legacy, but also bringing a much needed breath of fresh life to the series. Learning from Crash's rocky post-Naughty Dog history to expand upon that original gameplay format we all know and love. Picking up directly where Crash 3 left off, we see Cortex, Entropy and Uka Uka still trapped in the past. That is until Uka Uka manages to shit himself so hard that the fabric of space and time tears open, giving Cortex and Entropy an opportunity to escape and begin their plan to take over the multiverse. Meanwhile, Aku Aku senses that something is wrong and wakes Crash to investigate a nearby mountain, in which they find Lani Loli, one of the 4 quantum masks who control the forces of time and space. So now we must go on a multi-dimensional adventure to find and reunite the quantum masks and stop the bad guys from taking over. A fairly standard Crash fare, but there is more to it thrown in later, but we'll get to that when we get to that, okay? So Crash 4 is in every sense a full sequel to the original trilogy, carrying on the story and of course the gameplay. It adopts the classic linear corridor platforming style as before, breaking all the boxes, bonus rounds, collecting Wumpa Fruit, the familiar fare. But of course, much like how each of the numbered sequels did, new innovations and concepts introduce themselves to spice things up. But first and foremost, all of this is rooted in the game's controls and feel, and to quote some dumbass review site, it makes you feel like Crash Bandicoot.
Whoa.
Crash 4's controls are fantastic, and the strange thing is that it feels quite different from the original trilogy. It's quite odd to describe, but the best way I can put it is that it feels like Wrath of Cortex's controls, but with the snappy zippiness of the first 3 games. Because of that, it feels very fluent, fast, and smooth, but with some unique tweaks that I think actually really work well. Jumping has a more floaty feel to it, in that Crash has a bit more hang time, meaning that with some well-timed double jumps, you can be a lot more accurate with your jumping, even as far as to rectify a mistake while in mid-air, and it doesn't feel odd at all. The other main thing that feels different is the slide, and by extension, the slide jump. The slide on its own, granted, completely halts your momentum, and the jump itself is now somewhat more vertically charged as opposed to horizontally. But when you use the slide spin, you can cancel out the halt of speed to ensure your momentum, even allowing you to go over small enough gaps. One more subtle but very big change is how the signature spin move works. If you spin while moving, you'll perform a regular spin, but if you spin while stationary, you perform a low spin, which is especially useful for instances where you may only want to break the bottom crate in a stack. The new tweaks, while they may take some getting used to, they're overall very welcome, and the main feel is just so snappy and slick. I always felt in control, and I never felt that any of the deaths were down to the controls. Not only have we got new moves though, but new platforming mechanics. The 3 main ones here being wall running on certain spots, rope swinging, and these Rayman style rail grind sections, often requiring you to flip between different rails as well as sliding on top and below. They each serve to add just some much needed variety to the level design. The biggest new addition to the game's mechanics though are the quantum masks. Effectively, this this game's replacement for the permanent power-ups. As you go throughout the game and meet more of the masks, they will begin to appear in certain level sections where you have to use that mask-specific ability to progress. There's Lani Loli, who can phase elements of the level in and out of reality, Akano, who turns you into a destructive as hell tornado capable of destroying locked crates and using his spin to glide over long gaps, Kapunawa, who can briefly slow down time, and Ika Ika, who flips your gravity. Seriously though, using Ika Ika kinda gives me anxiety, like 1 minute you're down here, then suddenly Granted, every section where these masks appear are designed specifically for them, making them very situational. But honestly, given how their abilities work, they kinda require the level design to be catered specifically to them. And to make up for it, the sheer abundance of creative ways that they use these masks' abilities is incredible, especially when combined with the new platforming mechanics. But as well as plenty of new elements, we see the return of some old ones. Classic bonus rounds, the chase sequences, and of course some vehicle segments. And thankfully they have been implemented in a way that does not detract from the platforming in any way. I'm looking at you. This time there's only 2 vehicle types, but kind of a third if you count this little nod to Wrath of Cortex. I love this. And they only appear a couple of times each within platforming levels. The first is the jetboard from Crash 2, and it's as fun as it always was. And then you have the fan favourite animal riding sections. I want to curb stomp this prick. Welcome to the part of the video on how to fuck up one of the best elements of previous games. So yeah, these sections. Now, I'll say this, in terms of level design, these sections are really well done and have a lot more depth than the previous games did. But it doesn't really matter when Polar controls like a drunk-ass muppet. Good god, the controls on these animals are so finicky and they make you feel like you're sliding all over the goddamn place, and it's just it's way too sensitive. Combine that with the fact that the hitbox is so fucking piddly and pathetic, making you miss boxes which should be so easy to hit. Granted, this is more prominent in Polar's section as opposed to the later level when riding... Okay, I have no fucking clue what that thing is, but its section is way more tolerable simply because the box placements aren't fucking awful. But hey, if I get sick of riding that little Arctic bastard, I at least have other character options. In Crash 4, you can switch between Crash and Coco at any time between levels, and while they don't play any differently, it's cool to have the option. But the game also features 3 alternate playable characters in specific levels, these being an alternate dimension Torna, Dingo Dial, and Dr. Neo Cortex. The gameplay for all 3 is rooted within that classic Crash platforming, but each one has a unique moveset and mechanics to give each of them a unique gameplay style. Torna is perhaps the most similar to Crash and Coco, but now with the ability to wall jump and use her grappling hook to break distant boxes and stun enemies. Dingo Dial's gameplay is very destruction oriented with a very run and gun style. He can still jump and use his tail spin to break crates cause lord he thick, but his gameplay is also centered around using his air cannon to suck up boxes and TNT crates to fire them at targets to activate switches or to clear a path, as well as using it to allow him to hover in the air briefly after a jump. And then you have Cortex's gameplay, which is perhaps the most different. His movement is much more restrictive, using his dash ability to propel him and using his gun to transform enemies into solid or bouncy platforms. His levels are definitely more condensed and have a much more strategic and puzzle-based style to them, making for a very different pace of gameplay. And much like how the masks are utilised, the levels for these characters are designed specifically around them and their abilities, taking full advantage of their special qualities to be really creative in the level design. And that design philosophy is echoed throughout the game in general. The level design here is a lot more ambitious and really pushes the Crash mechanics to their maximum and just squeezes every creative idea out of them that they can. Along with using the much larger scale of the game to their advantage, we get some of the best and most memorable levels in the series thus far. What I love most about all of this is how the levels are no longer designed like samey corridors anymore, but rather utilising the scope of the game to make it feel like you're exploring an actual environment, making each part of the level interesting and unique. And now within these levels are more collectibles. Each level contains 6 gems to collect, 3 based on how much Wumpa Fruit you collect in the level, which is helped by the fact that Wumpa Fruit is now automatically collected and can't be spun away, 1 from reaching the end dying less than 3 times, the traditional break every crate gem, and 1 hidden somewhere in every level. Collecting these unlocks alternate skins for Crash and Coco that you can equip in any level, and they even show in cutscenes. They're an awesome touch, with many even acting as references to prior games in the series. Balloon Crash will kill you in your sleep. The game's progression is more focused and linear as well, returning to the map style of Crash 1 as you travel dimension to dimension. There's also several different level types as well as the main Crash and Coco levels. Firstly, there's the flashback tapes. These in a sense are kind of the replacement for death routes. To unlock these levels, you have to reach the tape in the normal levels without dying. Once you've collected the tape, you can then play them. These levels take place prior to Crash 1, as Crash and Coco were being experimented on by Cortex. They're styled as experiment chambers being recorded with a VHS filter, which is really damn charming. On the gameplay side though, these levels act as tightly designed, very challenging side-scrolling gauntlets that test your thinking and the platforming to get through them. And to sweeten the deal, you get some nice little story tidbits with voiceovers from Cortex, Embryo and Engine while you play them. They're just good, alright? Then there's the alternate timeline levels. These are the levels in which the other playable characters appear. As you go through some of the normal levels, you'll reach a point where an event may happen and a small cutscene triggers, like the path ahead will open up or be destroyed for example, but then you carry on. When you play the alternate timeline version of that level however, for the first part you'll play as one of the other characters in a section designed for them, right up until you reach an intersection where that event happens and you see how it happened. But then you transition back into playing the Crash and Coco side of the level, but supposedly harder. But to be honest, I find going back to these parts kinda superfluous. The only difference when you switch back to Crash and Coco is that there's different box placements, but it's honestly not enough to make the level unique or interesting for me. It just feels a bit too repetitious. I'd rather they expand on the first sections with the other character and then just end it at the intersection. Finally, each level aside from the flashback tapes has what the game calls an inverted version. This is essentially a mirror mode of the level, however with each dimension it comes with a new visual twist. Some of these actually alter the gameplay, like this underwater one slowing everything down, or this 1930s film style where the speed of everything including the controls are a lot more jittery and fast paced, but the majority of them are only aesthetic but are still really cool. Like this pixelated arcade one, this one where you paint the level as you go, this one that gives you eye cancer. It makes what would be a generic mirror mode into a more unique and stylized experience. And hell, if we're talking about aesthetics, let's talk about the game's presentation. Now, I understand that this has been a point of contention for some, but then again I also understand that people need to stop wasting their lives and do something better than make fucking petitions on this shit. Me personally, I love this art style. I think it's way more cartoony, detailed, stylized, and more importantly, it conveys so much more personality and character, which for the Crash series I think is a very important thing. The colours, the lighting, it all just pops right off the screen, and to supplement it we have a pretty damn good soundtrack from Walter Mayer. Granted, I don't think it's quite up there with Crash 2 or even Wrath of Cortex's soundtracks, but Crash 4 does go for a different approach in its music. The tracks blend into the background a lot more to make them more atmospheric, not to mention how dynamic they are, with the tracks changing depending on where you are and what happens in the level. Another great touch is that in certain areas which are very reminiscent of previous games, it splices the OG trilogy music within them as well. And the one thing I must give the presentation kudos for is just how varied it is. Every level, even if they are within the same dimension, feels visually and audibly unique and distinct from one another. They even use the dimensional theme to take us to some really cool locations dimensions we've never seen Crash go in a platformer game. You've got apocalyptic wastelands, pirate bays, ancient Japanese cities, fucking Mardi Gras, and if that wasn't enough, they also really pull out all the stops on the animation front. These characters have never felt so alive and so entertaining to watch than they are here, and it really does help with the game's more involved storytelling. Okay, well, when I say more involved storytelling, I mean more involved for Crash standards at least. While the basis of the plot does still follow the standard go and stop the bad guys thing, it allows for more cutscenes between levels, more character interactions, and a few more twists and turns in the story. The setup already poses some new elements, the whole multiverse setting already adds a more grander stake to things, and we even get a new villain dynamic as Cortex and Entropy leave Uka Uka behind to fend for themselves. As we go along, of course, the other playable characters are gradually introduced into the game, meeting Torna and seeing Dingodile unknowingly get sucked into the situation, and even halfway through the game we get a surprise when they go twin sanity on us and have us team up with Cortex to stop Entropy, after he betrays Cortex and teams up with a female version of himself from an alternate dimension. So when you really boil it down, it's about a pair of bandicoots teaming up with a deviant ROC, a crime against nature, and their dad to save a bunch of faceware to stop Entropy from literally fucking himself. And even then, when Entropy is defeated, it's not the end, as the game does have a last stretch, which kind of acts as more of an epilogue, but is still really good. The main thing though is that it allows so much more time for these characters to show themselves and to convey their louder than life personalities. There's great elements of this everywhere in the game, like Embryo talking to you throughout his levels and the aforementioned flashback tape voiceovers. There's just so much more character to it all and more opportunities to allow that. Granted, the story isn't perfect by any means. There's some elements that I would change or ones that I just feel are odd. I'd love to have had more time with the Quantum masks other than Lani Loli. He kind of takes up most of the mask spotlight, and it's a shame as I actually really like these other masks. Dingodile's whole role in the story is entirely pointless. You can just take him out and it wouldn't change a damn thing, but I mean, fuck it, he's Dingodile, so it's cool, enough said. And yeah, having the whole big climax and then this whole extra part is a bit weird, but it still works. I mean, in the end, this is a Crash Bandicoot story. You really shouldn't be expecting Tolstoy here, for fuck's sake. And for what it is, it's the best effort at a cohesive narrative we have gotten so far from the series. The characters are given a bit more depth, the writing is insanely witty and hilarious, and there's tons of great fan service in there. Some of the new voice actors they bring on for certain characters do a great job, and I think give us some of the best interpretations of these characters we have ever seen. Now, I have spent ages gushing about this game, and I think rightly so, it's a damn fine game. But as I have already stated, it's not perfect. There are flaws that I do think need to be addressed. I already touched upon some of the repetitiveness of certain aspects, like the alternate timeline levels and the goddamn animal riding sections. There's also several other finicky things about the game. Each of the other characters has their own strange tics. Torna's movement in general feels a tad stiff, and trying to aim as Cortex and Dingodile is quite flimsy, making being accurate a bit of a ball ache. There are also certain occasions where the hitbox in general can be annoyingly fussy at times, leading to a few annoying deaths or missing certain boxes. And I also want to talk about the boss fights quickly. Now, I do think these are really good boss fights. In fact, they're easily the most epic and difficult fights we've had in the series, but they all have a very similar feel to them. They all follow this formula of avoiding attacks and spinning enemies back at them, and they also include several checkpoints within the boss, and I don't really think it's necessary, honestly. I get that these are harder fights, but not to the point where it needs checkpoints. But speaking of challenge, the main thing that seems to be very contentious about the game is its difficulty. Now, Crash Bandicoot as a series, especially the first one, is known for some of its more challenging platforming. When it comes to Crash 4, you'll just be trotting along with the game and then uh-oh, your hands are bleeding. Without a doubt, Crash 4 is the hardest Crash platformer we have received. This is mainly down to the more ambitious and intricate level design and longer levels, making for some of the most meticulous and challenging platforming in the series. And I see no problem with it in that regard. That is entirely down to the level design. And with the controls being as good as they are, it never makes that aspect frustrating or unfair. And even then, again, death is really inconsequential in this game. The game has two modes of play, modern and retro mode. Retro mode keeps the life system intact, whereas modern just takes that away and allows you to keep infinitely dying. And to be honest, there's not a whole lot of difference between them since there's so much down Wumpa fruit that you'll rack up lives really quickly in retro mode anyway. True, there are some really annoying aspects such as the hidden boxes. This is something that they really overdo. When it has some sort of vague clue to allude to the boxes being there, it's fine, but when they just completely obstruct them like here, yeah, this would be fine if you're a fan of bullshit. But where it does become a problem is when you're going for full completion. Now, going for 100% and even 106% for this game is not really a whole lot different from the other games. You go through and collect all the gems and relics, except this time you have 6 gems per level and you have to collect them in all the regular levels and inverted levels. However, what sets it apart and makes the game so much of a ball ache this time are the new insanely perfect relics and the platinum relics. The insanely perfect relics require you to go through a level collecting all 6 gems without dying once. A perfect run, so to speak. You fuck up once, die or miss a single box, then you gotta restart. And when you have already much harder level design with bullshit such as this, yeah, it becomes a tedious hell on earth very quickly. And then the time trials. In my opinion, something that they absolutely butchered. Since they kind of have the mask abilities in lieu of permanent power-ups, the crash dash does not make a return, and instead your alternative for fast movement is a move called the triple spin, which is earned upon beating the final boss. And it is genuinely one of the most fucking worthless additions to the Crash series I have ever seen. Instead of simply holding down a button to go faster, you have to constantly do this time tapping to spin faster. Ugh. God, it just sucks. It makes these already strenuous time trials way more unbearable than they need to be. I honestly just recommend using the slide spin instead of crippling your thumb. This and the perfect relics just suck out all the fun of the game, making going through these levels strenuous, tedious, and stressful. There is nothing enjoyable about these whatsoever. Going through the game normally from start to end, despite the flaws, I would say is one of the best Crash experiences ever. But then going for full completion, I would say is one of the most unpleasant. I'm still whittling away at these platinums, and once I've done that, I am never 100%ing or 106%ing this game again. It was that fucking insufferable. Here's the thing though, that's if you only want to go for 100 or 106%, which of course is not essential, and I would only really recommend it for hardcore fans. When just going through the game normally though, I think it's near platforming perfection. The level design, the controls, the scope, the visuals, the character and charm. When I sit and play it from start to end for the fun of going through it without all the completion stuff, it really is the perfect sequel to the original trilogy, taking the best of what previous games had to offer and evolving it despite some flaws here and there. And it honestly makes me insanely excited for Crash's future. If this is the standard of game we can expect going forward, I think we have some great things to look forward to from this franchise. It's About Time perfectly encapsulates a lot of what I wanted and expected from a brand new Crash game in this style. It's clear that this game is catered to fans more so than the regular consumer. And while elements like the difficulty and the insanely annoying and tedious completion criteria I can see being a turn-off for some, and I honestly would recommend playing the Insane trilogy first for any newcomers, for established fans of the series, I think this is the best Crash Bandicoot game. Though not perfect, its clear Toys for Bob understood what fans loved about these games. And if anything, I think it proves that there is still a place for not only Crash but other 3D platformers, both linear and open-ended. Crash Bandicoot is well and truly back, and to be able to say that genuinely fills me with such joy. And it makes me so hopeful and excited for what the future holds for this series. Now I'm kind of all of a sudden on this Crash Bandicoot high after It's About Time, so I actually went out and picked myself up the next installment. As always, thank you all so much for watching, everyone. Feel free to like and subscribe if you feel like it, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, guys.